Elira is alive. Her words cut through the chamber like a bell struck hard. The hall fell silent, a sudden vacuum where the tide had been swelling against her. Alive? Celine's voice was a whip crack. And you make this claim now? Sanavi's mouth curved, not in mirth, but in something sharper, like a blade sliding free of its sheath. I had intended to announce this today, not knowing some already saw me as expendable. From within her cloak, she drew a sealed missive, stepped forward, and laid it upon the table before Celine with theatrical care. This arrived 2 nights ago, from Elira herself, declaring she will return soon. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Celine laughed, soft, silken, deadly. A paper. That is your salvation. She rose slowly, every line of her body rigid with control. How do we know this isn't a forgery? A desperate gambit to cling to power? Sanavi tilted her head, her smile wicked now. By all means, she said, voice purring like a cat that had cornered the hound. Verify it. The tax collectors froze, color draining from their faces. The leader's lips moved soundlessly before shaping the words in a rasp of terror. Crown Princess? He fell to his knees. His men released the old woman as if burned, bowing so fast their foreheads struck dirt. Elira's gaze swept over them, cold and clear, her voice sharp enough to cut bone. You shame the crown. The words cracked like a verdict. You steal from those you're sworn to protect. You beat the defenseless. You think no one sees, but I see you. The crowd held its breath. I promise you, she went on, each word like a tolling bell. There will be no mercy for men who prey on the weak, not from me. Send 5 of your best, no torches, no noise. Kill on sight, and double the watchers in the capital. If she so much as whispers near the palace gates, I want her throat slit before the echo fades. Protect the princess! A merchant bellowed. A tomato flew like a missile from his hand, smashing into the commander's face. The commander's hand flew to his sword, and chaos erupted. Shouts, screams, the crash of barrels overturned as the market became a war front of flying produce. Guards staggered under a hail of apples, pottery, fists. Run! Someone bellowed, and Elira didn't need telling twice. She bolted, weaving through bodies as the guards fought to push forward. She looked directly at Elira. Lord Makore sends his regards, she said. The terror of the moment solidified around them, a suffocating ice. One of the assassins stepped forward, a long, cruel knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. He didn't look at Amma for instruction. He already had his orders. Amma's smile widened, a final, terrifying flourish. He said to make sure you understand that this time there will be no river to save you. Sanavi crouched on a rocky outcrop, swallowed by shadow, her breath slow, her heartbeat steady. Below, the valley opened like a secret slit in the world. 100 black tents lay in perfect formation, their canvas taut and gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Spears stood like teeth along their perimeters, catching silver from the night. The ground trembled under the rhythmic thud. Thud, thud of the training drills, boots and weapons moving as one in disciplined unison. At the center of the camp, a banner rippled in the mountain wind. A serpent coiled around a sword, its scales picked out in deep green and black, its fangs bared in perpetual strike. Makore's sigil. The missive had not lied. The camp was real, his army hidden, growing, waiting. Sanavi's jaw tightened. This wasn't a band of mercenaries or a scattering of rebels. This was a force being sharpened, every man and blade honed for something greater. A coup? No. Makore wouldn't march on the capital while Selene still wore the regent's circlet. This was something worse. A usurpation. This was a blade held to the kingdom's throat, ready to strike the moment Elira, or any threat, resurfaced. Her hand curled around the hilt of her dagger. She memorized every detail: the placement of the tents, the numbers, the guards, the terrain, storing it in a mind trained to kill and dismantle. A soldier passed below, his torch flickering. Sanavi melted back into the rocks, her cloak blending with the shadows. "Makore, your secrets are no longer yours." He thought to strike unseen. He thought to rise when no one was watching. He would be the one taken unawares. Whatever he was planning, she would crush it before it drew its first breath. And when she came for him, it would be without warning. The vaulted ceiling of the royal court shimmered faintly in the midday light, gold filigree catching on the banners of Eldora. Yet beneath the splendor, the air was thick. Politics had a way of choking even the most opulent of halls. On the dais, Selene sat in her sister's throne, spine rigid, nails biting into her palms beneath the folds of her gown. Her face, however, was an immaculate mask, devoid of the slightest flicker of emotion. At the center of the marble floor, the Minister of Rites' voice droned with ritual solemnity as he unrolled a long scroll. And thus, by will of the crown, it is proclaimed that Her Highness, Princess Selene of Eldora, is to be wed to Lord Dine of House Makore. The announcement struck the court like a hammer blow. Applause rippled through the room, loud in some quarters, polite in others. Lady Tavora's quill froze mid-stroke, ink bleeding into the parchment. Across the chamber, Ijara leaned back, expression unreadable. The minister continued. "Preparations for the engagement ceremony shall begin immediately." Selene inclined her head graciously. "I thank the council for their support," she said evenly. "But there will be no engagement ceremony at this time." A hush swept the room. "We are still in dark times," she continued, voice steady. "The king is dead, and the fate of my sister, Crown Princess Elira, remains unknown. To host a celebration now would be to dance on sorrow's grave. It grieves me deeply that such a moment, one meant for joy, is marred by tragedy. But I give you my word. If 6 months pass and Elira does not return, and I am crowned queen in her stead, my wedding will be grand enough to make up for what is now postponed." Some councillors chuckled, nodding approvingly, others clapped. Yet among the more calculating members, eyes narrowed. The message was there, subtle but sharp. She was either stalling or not fully on board. Then, the golden doors boomed open. Sanavi stepped inside, black cloak trailing, every movement measured. Her eyes found Selene's across the court. "You are late," Selene said, the faintest edge in her tone. "But just in time. Tell us, how fares your investigation into my sister's disappearance?" Sanavi's gaze slid to Makore before returning to the dais. "I am digging," she said, voice low, deliberate. "The cover-up is precise, clean, but I will find its flaw." "We need answers," Selene said sharply. "Her absence holds everything back, my engagement included." Sanavi's brow rose, a flicker of something unreadable at the mention of an engagement, but she said nothing. "The maid in the royal dungeon," Selene pressed. "Bring her out for public questioning. If she refuses to speak, execute her." "No," Sanavi said without hesitation. "By Elira's own order, the maid is to remain there, untouched and unseen, until she herself returns. I am in charge now," Selene countered, voice sharpening. "I give the orders." "I agree," Makore said smoothly from the council floor. "Her Highness is correct. In a time of crisis, the acting princess must take decisive measures. If the maid has information, withholding it could endanger the realm. The trap was set. The pressure in the chamber tightened. Then Ijara stood. The High Minister of Justice needed no raised voice. His presence alone parted the tension like a ship's prow through ice. "The law is explicit," he said, each word weighted. "By Article 7 of Sovereign Continuity Law, Princess Celine, as regent, cannot countermand the standing orders of a missing heir until her title is lawfully revoked or transferred." The silence was heavy enough to bend the air. Celine's jaw tightened, the faintest twitch at the corner of her eye. Surely exceptions can be made? Ijara didn't blink. No. He looked directly at her. "Until such a time, you or anyone else cannot thwart Elira's orders in this matter." Finality. Law has spoken. Celine exhales through her nose, her rage a living thing beneath her skin. Makore raised his hands in a pacifying gesture, his smile as smooth as glass. "We are all here for the same reason," he said mildly. "To find Princess Elira. We seek only to aid the search. Surely, Commander, you understand our impatience?" Sanavi met his gaze. "Impatience breeds mistakes, Chief Counselor, and mistakes leave traces." The threat hung, unspoken but deafening. "Of course," Makore said smoothly, his smile never reaching his eyes. As the session dissolves, Sanavi turns to leave, but not before catching Lady Tavora's barely perceptible nod. The ledger was heavier than it looked. Elira sat cross-legged on the floor, lamplight pooling over the cracked leather cover. She flipped to the first page, and Barek's voice rose in her mind, low, urgent, and frayed at the edges. "I worked at the Southern Hill mine." His eyes that night had been wide, darting to the shadows, as if something might break through. "It's not just miners down there," he went on. "Unregistered villagers, debtors, prisoners. We dig until our hands split. But that's not the worst of it." The next page listed dates, weights, and destinations. None of them the royal treasury. The gold never reaches the treasury. The caretaker, his men, they load huge carts under guard. Elite soldiers, but their armor has no insignia. They vanish into the forest. Her eye in the present flicked over a name written in cramped script, one she already knew she'd find. "Last week," Barek continued, "I was assigned to help with a shipment. We followed it deep into the woods. It's his secret militia camp." "Lord Makore," Barek had whispered. "This gold is feeding him." That was when the pieces had locked into place. The assassins who'd struck them on the road to Darai weren't hired thugs. They were soldiers drilled in precision. From the bundle, Barek had pulled the ledger. "We stole this from the caretaker's office, planned to take it to the capital and place it in the hands of High Commander Sanavi. But they found us, cut my companions down until I was the only one left." In old Malu's dim room now, Elira closed the book slowly. The proof was here. Every shipment, every false name, every drop point. Makore's reach ran deep. Her jaw tightened as she imagined a council stripped of men like him, a kingdom free of their poison. Across from her, Jobel sat sharpening his blade in slow, measured strokes. She met his eyes. "We will burn them out," she said. He gave a single nod. No questions. The trees pressed close on all sides, their branches knitting overhead so tightly that the moonlight barely touched the forest floor. The night smelled of damp earth and pine, the air cool enough to bite. Henrik paced in uneven circles, boots scuffing at the dirt. His fingers twitched at his sides, restless, like the storm in his head had nowhere else to go. For days he'd replayed that drunken conversation with old Malu's apprentice, Jojan, again and again. What if someone did care? Someone who wants to burn this corruption to the ground? At first, he'd dismissed it as the haze of cheap wine twisting his memory. But the more he thought, the more certain he became. That man wasn't some half-wit herbalist's lackey he pretended to be. There'd been something sharper under the surface, something dangerous. And yet, here Henrik was, seeking him out anyway, waiting in the dark, hoping he wasn't stepping into a noose. A twig snapped. Henrik spun, heart kicking hard in his chest. Yobel stepped into the clearing. No lazy slouch now. His posture was straight, alert, his gaze cutting right through Henrik. Henrik let out the breath he'd been holding. You came. Yobel's mouth curved into a grin. You cornered me like a debt collector. Hard to refuse. Henrik rubbed at his temples. I've been thinking. About what I said when I was... He grimaced. Stars, I was so drunk I could have drowned a horse. Yobel's grin widened. And talked enough to hang us both. Henrik's hands stilled, his gaze locked on Yobel, clear now, no hesitation. You're not Jojan. Yobel didn't blink. And you're the tax collector who hates his uncle enough to steal his ledger. He countered, tone flat, unbothered. So, here we are. Henrik's shoulders sagged, but his voice was steady. I meant what I said, drunk. Every word. This village is starving. My uncle lines his pockets while children gnaw on bark. His jaw tightened. I want it to burn. Yobel studied him, the raw fury in his clenched fists, the shame in his down-turned mouth. A man at war with his own skin. Then, without breaking eye contact, Yobel said, Come in. Henrik frowned, confused, until a hooded shadow detached from the trees and stepped into the clearing. The hood fell back. Henrik froze. Elira. Her face, unveiled, unguarded, was pale in the moonlight, her single eye gleaming with quiet intensity. He staggered back, shock rippling over his features, followed by recognition. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Yobel's hand drifted toward his dagger, not to strike, but to measure the risk. You're alive? Henrik's voice was a whisper yell, mirroring the shock and disbelief etched on his face. Elira didn't move, didn't blink. For a heartbeat, the forest held still. Then Henrik bowed, not the stiff dip of a subject before a crown, but the deep bend of a man seeing hope for the first time in years. Yobel's hand left his dagger. We need your help, Henrik, Elira said. Silence thickened between them, heavy as the dark. Henrik straightened, his voice low but unwavering. Tell me what to do. The late afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows of Celine's solar, draping the room in bands of gold and shadow. Dust motes drifted lazily in the warm light, but there was nothing lazy about Celine's pacing. She moved like a caged predator, each step measured yet restless. Dine sat rigidly in a gilded chair, his posture taut despite the outward calm he tried to project. His fingers tapped a slow, soundless rhythm against his knee, the only tell of his unease. The serpent on his family's signet ring glinted whenever the light caught it, a small, mocking reminder of the shadow at his back. Can we at least talk? He said quietly. Celine spun to face him, her glare sharp enough to draw blood. Talk about what, Dane? He gestured between them, the motion small, tight. This. The marriage. There's nothing to talk about. She snapped, then paused. Her better instincts told her to end it there, but she couldn't. No, she murmured, her voice dropping to a dangerous hush. On the contrary, there is. She strode towards him, each step deliberate. Let's talk about the fact that for as long as I can remember, I've rejected you. As a friend, as a lover, and certainly as a husband. Why can't you see I want nothing to do with you? He flinched at the blow, but kept his gaze steady. Why? Because of this! She jabbed a finger into the space between them, as if she could pierce the air itself. You're Makore's son! Dain rose so quickly the chair scraped against the marble. I am not my father. Her laugh was brittle as glass. No? Then why is his handprint all over this? She closed the space between them until the scent of her perfume curled into the air between them. He's powerful enough to force my hand, and I have no say in it. His jaw clenches. I didn't ask him to do this, Celine. He just save it. Her voice cut across his. But know this. If this farce ends with me marrying you, you will never be king consort. You will sit at my table and share the same bed, but you will never hold power. A long beat passed, but Dain didn't look away. I don't want power, he said softly. That stopped her, just for a heartbeat. Her breath hitched, small but enough for him to see it. He stepped closer, his voice low and raw. You know what I really want. The sunlight shifted as the day slid further towards dusk, warm gold paling to the color of fire. It fell across Celine's face, outlining the tension in her jaw, the flicker in her eyes. Give me a chance, Celine. Not as Makore's son, as me. Celine's lips part as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she turned sharply on her heel and stormed out, the heavy door slamming behind her like a gavel striking judgment. Dain remained alone, his reflection fractured in the mirrored panels of the solar. He exhaled slowly, pressing his thumbs to his eyelids. Unrequited love on one side, a father's dagger at his back on the other. Makore's plan was clear. Use Dain to control the throne. And if that failed, burn the monarchy to ash. Oligarchs, bloodshed, Celine's body on the pyre, his fists clenched. His boots struck the marble like a war drum as he strode down the corridor until he stood before a place he never thought he'd enter. Sanavi's office. His father's words followed him like a shadow. You are my blade now. Don't try to cut yourself. He shut them out. Without knocking, he entered. Sanavi looked up from a report, a dagger balanced between her fingers. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Dain standing before her. No guard, no formal request for audience, just the audacity to cross her threshold like he belonged there. Her tone was a whetstone dragged over steel. You're either very brave or very stupid, Lord Dain. He closed the door behind him. Both, probably. She studied him. The set of his shoulders was taut, but not with arrogance. This was tension wound tight enough to break. His face held no mask, no attempt at the polished, courtly expression most men wore before her. That alone unsettled her, more than she'd admit. This was Makore's son. The blade she had always assumed was pointed at her throat. And yet, here he was, walking into her den without a weapon drawn. If this was a trap, it was a clever one. What brought you to your father's worst nightmare? She asked, letting the steel in her tone remind him exactly where he stood. He stepped forward, and for a brief moment she thought he might speak in riddles, as Makore's agents often did. Instead, he reached for his hand and slid off the serpent ring. Makore's mark, the emblem of the family she'd spent her career countering. When he placed it on her desk, it landed with a dull, metallic click, heavy for something so small. I'm here to make a deal, he said. Something in his tone caught her off guard. She studied the ring, then him. The gesture was deliberate, a severing. She knew what it cost to place a family's crest out in the open, unshielded, especially a man like Makore's. Her mind ticked through the implications. Either this was a reckless ploy, or Dain had reached a point where recklessness was safer than obedience. She let the dagger still in her hand, the point angled toward him. Makore's son, offering a deal to her. It reeked of danger, but the kind that could tilt the board if handled correctly. She'd seen men break under their father's shadows. She'd also seen the few who turned that shadow into a weapon of their own choosing. She gestured to the chair opposite, her gaze never leaving his. "Sit," she said finally. "Start talking." If this was the day Makore's blade turned in his own hand, she intended to be the one holding the hilt. The pale griffin's private quarters lay drowned in shadow, save for the wavering light of a single oil lamp. Its flame shivered in the polished obsidian of Makore's desk, dancing over the neat columns of ink in his ledger. The air was thick with the smell of aged wine and cold iron from the freshly sharpened letter opener resting beside a half-emptied goblet. The door opened without a knock. Amatonde slipped in like smoke, a black-cloaked figure at her side. She guided him forward, then retreated in silence. Shawl's hood fell, revealing the scar carved from temple to jaw. He bowed, enough to acknowledge rank, not enough to concede worth. His eyes moved over Makore the way a knife tested meat for tenderness. The man didn't look up. His voice, when it came, was calm as a blade laid flat. "You interrupt my accounts, Shawl. This best be worth the ink I've spoiled." Shawl stepped forward. "I bring fire for your hearth, my lord." A gloved hand extended, pressing a sketch onto the desk. "Elira lives." The quill in Makore's hand stilled. Shawl saw it, the way the man's attention tightened like a bowstring, though his posture hardly shifted. A single bead of ink spread into the ledger, blotting out a row of tidy sums. Makore lifted the parchment, eyes scanning the bold charcoal lines of Jobel's face. "She travels with this one," Shawl said. "A guard. One of Senavi's shadows, by the look of him." Makore's thumb traced the edge of the page, the motion almost tender, like testing the skin of a lover's throat. "How did you come by this?" His tone was soft, dangerously so. "As you ordered," Shawl replied, watching his master's hands for the smallest flicker of intent. "We hunted Barek and the rats who stole the caretaker's ledger. 2 of my men cornered him near the river bend. One ended with a dagger through his skull. The other, unconscious, chest opened to the bone." A pause. When he woke, he swore the princess herself cut him down. His companion was killed by her guard. Makore's grip on the parchment tightened until the edges buckled. "Senavi," he thought. "What game are you playing?" "There was another guard missing with her?" "The soldier's name is unknown," Shawl said. "But with your leave, we'll sweep the village in Darai where the sighting occurred." Makore smoothed the parchment flat again, movements deliberate as a predator stepping closer to the kill. "Send 5 of your best, no torches, no noise. Kill on sight, and double the watchers in the capital. If she so much as whispers near the palace gates, I want her throat slit before the echo fades." Dismissal came in a flick of Makore's hand. Shawl inclined his head once, stepping back into the shadowed corridor. He didn't need to look over his shoulder to know Makore's eyes stayed on him until the latch clicked shut. Alone, Makore's composure cracked. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with a fury too sharp to contain. His gaze lingered on the empty space Shawl had left, his thoughts racing past the assassin's report into the territory of what must be done. Elira's face rose unbidden in his mind, defiance intact, refusing the death he had offered so many times. "Why can't you just die, you freak?" The words tore from him, raw and jagged. The goblet flew from his hand, striking the wall. Wine ran down the plaster in slow, blood-dark rivulets. The room was silent again, save for the whisper of the lamp flame, steady as a heartbeat. The Queen's chambers glowed with a muted brilliance, all sunlight filtered through heavy brocade drapes that made the room feel like a gilded cage. The hearth crackled softly, its warmth doing little to ease the chill in the air, the kind that came from too many secrets and too few places to hide them. Celine stood near the flames, her figure a study in impatience. Her nails tapped a sharp rhythm against the rim of a goblet of wine she had not yet touched, as though the act alone might keep her from breaking something. Near the window, Lord Wooba worried at his rings, turning them round and round with the fidgeting of a man who liked to think himself in control, even when the walls were closing in. His silence said enough. He was waiting for someone else to take the risk of the first word. The door opened at last. Makore stepped inside and shut it with a click so precise it sounded like judgment. He carried the stillness of a predator into the chamber, his stride unhurried, his expression composed in that way that always made others lean closer, hoping to read him, fearing they could not. He did not bow. "We have a problem," he said, his voice carrying the weight of something more than trouble. A folded parchment slid from his fingers and landed with a papery sigh on the table. It unfurled in silence, revealing the strong, unsmiling face of Jobel drawn in precise charcoal lines. "Elira is alive." The words landed like stones dropped into deep water. Ripples spread across the room in the form of shifting breaths and startled eyes. Celine crossed the space in a rustle of silks and snatched the parchment, scanning the drawing with a hawk's precision. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice clipped, the question more accusation than inquiry. Makore's gaze slid to hers, his mouth curving into something that looked like a smile, but cut like a blade. "His name is Jobel, the man who saved her during the coronation attempt, the one who shouted the warning, and now it seems he travels with her." The silence that followed was almost physical, thick and oppressive. Even the hearth seemed to burn more quietly. The queen lowered her cup back to its saucer with the grace of a woman who measured gestures as weapons, the porcelain clink sounding louder than it should have. Celine's voice sliced through the stillness. "Who made this nobody a guard?" "Sanavi," Wooba said quickly, sensing the queen's temper and eager to divert it elsewhere. It must be Sanavi. She plucked him from nowhere, armed him, set him at Elira's side. "Then she knows more than she's letting on," Celine snapped, heat rising off her like banked coals struck by wind. "Undoubtedly," Makore murmured. His eyes had drifted, not to Celine, not to Wooba, but to the queen herself, watching for the smallest crack in the facade. Wooba leaned forward, voice oily with urgency. "We must remove her. Immediately." The queen stirred at last. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Too soft, like silk sheathed over steel wire. "On what grounds, Lord Wooba?" High Minister Ijara would never permit it without cause. "Incompetence," Wooba said, almost triumphant. "She failed to protect the crown princess, not once but twice. First at the coronation, then again in Darai. Months have passed, and she has turned up nothing but empty reports." The queen's fingers tapped once against the arm of her chair, an idle rhythm belying sharp thought. Her gaze drifted to Makore now, not for an answer, but for confirmation that he understood the stakes she had yet to name. "A fair point," Makore said, his voice as smooth as oiled steel. "The people grow restless. The nobility whispers. If we frame it as a matter of the realm's security—" His smile was a predator's, thin and sure. "Paint her as a liability, too blinded by loyalty to see the threats right under her nose." The queen considered this in silence, her eyes glimmering like polished obsidian. Then, softly, she said, "A commander who cannot command. A hound who cannot hunt." Celine's smirk was all teeth. "Ijara can't argue with facts. The law is clear. Negligence in duty is grounds for dismissal." "And who?" Wooba pressed, leaning forward like a man too eager for his own good. "Would replace her?" The queen leaned back instead, lifting her drink with languid grace, her smile a curved blade hidden in velvet. Her eyes flicked toward Makore. Not for long, just enough for him to feel the weight of it like a hand at the back of his neck. Before she spoke, each syllable deliberate. Someone more amenable to the crown's interests. The words were silk, the meaning, a knife. Celine's smirk deepened. Then it settled. We strip her of command, and when she's at her weakest, we cut her loose. Makore finished, smoothing the line of his sleeve with surgical precision. Accidents happen. The queen lowered her cup and fixed him with a steady gaze. Send some of your men. Take care of that freak immediately. Makore inclined his head, the perfect picture of obedience. Yet as he turned towards the door, he felt the queen's eyes on his back, cold, assessing, as though weighing not only Senavi's fate, but his. The throne room was a sun-drenched cavern of marble and gilt, but the air felt close, restless, heavy with the stink of ambition. Celine sat on the regent's seat, her circlet gleaming. Below, the council spread like a restless tide, and in the center of that shifting sea, Senavi stood motionless, a dagger in a room of silk. Commander Senavi has failed in every critical duty. Celine's voice carried like a tolling bell through the vaults. Twice the crown princess was endangered, once at her coronation, again in Darai. Since then, Senavi has failed to recover her, dead or alive. What has she brought before this court? Nothing but excuses and empty reports. Her nails tapped the armrest in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The post requires someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Ijara rose, slow as a glacier shifting under its own weight. Article 12 of the Martial Code requires proof of negligence. Makore interrupted smoothly, his tone cutting clean across his. And what greater failure than losing a royal heir? 4 months of silence and hollow assurances? That is negligence carved in stone. His smile was a scalpel gliding across soft flesh. Wuba pounced next, voice dripping contempt. If incompetence is not grounds, then what is? Are we to keep a blind hound on the royal leash merely because she bites prettily when commanded? The safety of the crown cannot rest on loyalty alone. Makore added, voice gone low and dangerous, smooth as oiled steel. Senavi is loyal, yes, but loyalty without competence is treason by another name. Predictable. Senavi watched them circle her like hounds rehearsing a kill. Her expression was unreadable, yet her stillness was not submission. It was a waiting cat's crouch. She let the silence stretch, long enough for the weight of their accusations to bear down. And then, softly, almost like an afterthought, she said, Elira is alive. Her words cut through the chamber like a bell struck hard. The hall fell silent, a sudden vacuum where the tide had been swelling against her. Alive? Celine's voice was a whip crack. And you make this claim now? Senavi's mouth curved, not in mirth, but in something sharper, like a blade sliding free of its sheath. I had intended to announce this today, not knowing some already saw me as expendable. From within her cloak, she drew a sealed missive, stepped forward, and laid it upon the table before Celine with theatrical care. This arrived 2 nights ago, from Elira herself, declaring she will return soon. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Celine laughed, soft, silken, deadly. A paper. That is your salvation. She rose slowly, every line of her body rigid with control. How do we know this isn't a forgery? A desperate gambit to cling to power? Senavi tilted her head, her smile wicked now. By all means, she said, voice purring like a cat that had cornered the hound. Verify it. Tavora stepped forward, moving with the caution of one who knows every eye is upon her. She lifted the letter, scanned its lines, and her brow knitted in concentration. At last she spoke, each word deliberate. "This is Elira's hand. It is unmistakable. The angular flourishes on the E, the uneven pressure, it's Princess Elira's." A hiss of surprise rippled through the chamber. Makore felt the knife twist. "Bring the archives," Uba barked. "Compare it." And so they came. Servants rushed in with decrees, scrolls, and old writings from the archives, all bearing Elira's writing. Tavora laid them side by side, the council crowding like vultures. Line by line, flourish by flourish, the writing was compared. And each stroke sang the same truth. The letter bore Elira's hand. "Stars," a councillor whispered, almost in awe. "It's her hand." Nods of reluctant agreement spread like a contagion. Celine's jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped. She sat, very slowly, as if the air itself resisted her descent. She forced her mouth into a regal smile, but it felt brittle at the edges. "Very well. If this is truly her hand, we must await her return. Until then." She let the words drift like smoke, but Sanavi caught the promise buried in them. "This isn't over." Dismissal rippled through the council, ministers bowing out, murmurs scattering like startled birds. Celine swept from the chamber rigid as a blade, rage carefully masked by grace. Makore lingered, watching Sanavi with the faintest curve of a smile that never reached his eyes. Inside, his thoughts cut fast and clean. She knew. She was ready. Someone whispered in her ear before the blade was drawn. But who? Sanavi met his gaze steadily. Predator seeing predator. Both knew today's victory was temporary. What no one else knew, not Celine, not Makore, was that Tavora herself had forged the letter, copying Elira's hand with flawless precision. It had been done just the day before. Sanavi was filing a report when Tavora slipped inside, her usually composed features tight with urgency. "They mean to remove you tomorrow. Incompetence, that's their weapon." Sanavi's quill froze mid-stroke. The air sharpens. "So this is how they've chosen to play." Her thoughts sliced through countermoves and stratagems, settling like a blade in its sheath. Then her gaze locked on Tavora. "Do you need to be anywhere today?" Tavora blinked. "No. Why?" Sanavi set down the quill with care. "Because you'll be writing in Elira's hand." A beat. Tavora's breath caught, then exhaled in understanding. Without a word, she took the seat opposite, pulled a blank parchment from her sash, and began to replicate the princess's script with the precision of a master scribe. The angular ease, the uneven ink pressure, the faint drag at every trailing R, each flaw rendered perfect. Sanavi watched in silence as the lie took shape between them. Now, as Sanavi strode from the council chamber, Tavora fell into step beside her. Only when the marble corridor lay empty behind them did Tavora's mask crack, her voice a whisper. "That was too close." Sanavi's eyes stayed fixed ahead, expression hard as drawn steel. "We bought time." And time, in a court like this, was sharper than any dagger. The pounding at the door was a hammer stroke of doom, shattering the quiet of the afternoon like a blade through parchment. Old Malu's son barely had time to unlatch the wood before Henrik shouldered past him, breath ragged, eyes wild. "Jobel!" His voice was a frayed rope, taut with urgency. "Where is—" Jobel emerged from the back room, silent as shadow, but Henrik was already upon him, gripping his forearm hard enough to bruise. "They know. Your name, your face. Makore's men are here. 5 of them. They came with orders for my uncle." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "A drawing of you. Your real name. They're to kill you on sight. You and your companion. His eyes flicked past Jobal's shoulder. Where is... A floorboard creaked as Elira stepped out, standing in the doorway, her single eye wide, the scar at her side pulsing as if remembering the blade that put it there. Henrik didn't flinch at the sight of her unveiled face. "Princess," he said, rough with deference. "My uncle's guards will be here any moment. We have to go. Now." Jobal's hand went to the dagger at his hip. "How much time?" "None." Elira stepped forward. "We can't leave. Old Malu's family, if we flee, we won't be here when they come." Old Malu interrupted. His fingers moved with lethal efficiency as he bundled dried herbs into a sack. "We have kin in the north." He turned to her for the last time. "Go." Panic coiled in the air, thick, choking. Henrik grabbed Jobal's arm again. "There's a place in the mountains. The owner owes me a favor. She will hide you. But the three of us can't leave together. Too noticeable." He pointed toward the market square visible through the window. "We split up. Meet at the lightning-struck oak by the forest's edge." Jobal's grip on his dagger whitened. "I'm not leaving her side. Not again." The words were ground stone. Elira reached for him, not to pull him back, to steady him, to steady herself. "Henrik's right," she said softly. "It's the only way." For a breath, Jobal looked ready to argue. Then his shoulders sagged. He nodded once, sharp. Hoods drawn low, they began their silent exit. Henrik went first, vanishing into the market's clamor. Jobal went next, his posture hunched, playing the harmless half-wit once more. Elira waited a count of 5. "Just another shadow," she told herself, and stepped out, melting into the crowd. The market churned like a restless tide, hawkers shouting over the creak of laden carts, the stench of fish and sweat clinging to the air. Elira slipped through the crush of bodies with her hood drawn low, her steps measured, heart hammering far too fast for the languid pace she forced herself to keep. "Out of the way!" The barked command sliced through the din. Ahead, guards carved a brutal path down the main road, shoving anyone too slow to move. Elira's pulse spiked. She turned sharply into another lane, disappearing into the press of people, hoping their eyes slid past her. Halfway down the lane, she stopped short. Some tax collectors were ransacking a small shop, their laughter carrying over the muted outrage of onlookers. Clay jars shattered under their boots. Baskets of salted fish spilled into the dirt. The shopkeeper, an old woman, stooped and wiry, clung to the last basket with clawed hands, pleading. Elira's throat tightened. She almost moved on. Almost. If she made it back to the palace alive, she could deal with scum like this. But then... The leader slapped the old woman. The crack of flesh on flesh rang like a whip. The old woman reeled, collapsing in a heap. Silence rippled through the watching crowd. The barricade Elira had built inside herself shattered. All the rage she had swallowed these past months, the helplessness, the bitter taste of exile, rose molten and merciless. Her blood sang with it, hot and blinding. Before thought could intervene, her feet carried her forward. "Let her go." Her voice was low, calm only in the way storms are calm before they tear the world apart. The collectors stilled. Slowly they turned to her, eyes crawling over the hooded figure that dared command them. Their leader sneered, a jagged grin cutting across his face. "And if we don't?" Elira's answer came like steel drawn from a scabbard. "You'll regret it." The leader barked a laugh and stepped toward her. "And who will make us regret it?" She tugged back her hood. "Me." A ripple went through the crowd, like wind over tall grass. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the whispers began. "The Cyclops Princess. It's her." For years they had whispered her name as a jest, a ghost, a scar on the royal line. Now she stood before them, very much alive. The tax collectors froze, color draining from their faces. The leader's lips moved soundlessly before shaping the words in a rasp of terror. "Crown Princess?" He fell to his knees. His men released the old woman as if burned, bowing so fast their foreheads struck dirt. Elira's gaze swept over them, cold and clear, her voice sharp enough to cut bone. "You shame the crown." The words cracked like a verdict. The kneeling men flinched as if struck. Elira stepped closer, the rage in her veins honed to a blade. "You steal from those you're sworn to protect. You beat the defenseless. You think no one sees, but I see you." The crowd held its breath. "I promise you," she went on, each word like a tolling bell. "There will be no mercy for men who prey on the weak, not from me." She turned to the people, their faces worn hollow by hunger, by fear, and something inside her softened, even as fire roared through her chest. "I am sorry," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "Sorry for what you have suffered, for what my sister has allowed, for what those sworn to serve you have done in our name." No one moved, no one breathed. "When I return," she promised, "there will be no more of this. Taxation will be fair. No one will take the bread from your tables." A murmur rippled, then swelled as hope sparked in weary eyes. "Your harvests will be yours. Your labor will be yours. No more chains disguised as duty." The cheer broke like thunder, loud, wild, disbelieving. For the first time, they looked past the eye they had mocked and saw a princess who burned for them. Elira's gaze fell once more on the tax collectors, still groveling. "You will never touch these people again." Her voice dropped to a growl. "Now, scram!" They bolted, scrambling to their feet and vanishing into the press of bodies. The cheer roared higher, lifting like a storm wind as Elira stood rooted in the center, her single eye blazing. For one fierce, soaring heartbeat, she felt it. Power, not as a crown or a scepter, but as a promise sealed in blood and fire. She had won the people. She had their hearts. She had their trust. Then she saw them, the guards, a line of steel and leather at the far end of the lane, their faces masks of obedience. The crowd's jubilation faltered as the soldiers stepped forward, forming a wall across her only exit. "Princess." The lead guard bowed with rigid reverence, voice oiled with false courtesy. "We have orders to escort you back to the warden for a safe and comfortable return to the capital." The meaning dripped through every syllable. A safe return, cold in a coffin. Elira stepped back, her gaze darting, heart stuttering in her chest. Left, blocked. Right, blocked. The crowd sensed it too. There was no exit. "Protect the princess!" A merchant bellowed. A tomato flew like a missile from his hand, smashing into the commander's face. The commander's hand flew to his sword, and chaos erupted. Shouts, screams, the crash of barrels overturned as the market became a war front of flying produce. Guards staggered under a hail of apples, pottery, fists. "Run!" someone bellowed, and Elira didn't need telling twice. She bolted, weaving through bodies as the guards fought to push forward. Carts toppled in her wake, hands shoving them down to block pursuit. She veered into an alley, lungs burning, heart clawing its way up her throat. Another turn, guards ahead. Another, steel glinting at the far end. They were everywhere, hemming her in. If they caught her, it was over. She sprinted toward the last sliver of light, and a hand clamped around her arm. Before she could scream, she was yanked sideways, slammed into shadow, her back colliding into a warm chest. Arms locked around her, steadying her as her breath tore ragged from her throat. The guards thundered past the mouth of the gap, blind to the two figures pressed into its narrow dark. When Elira finally turned, The hooded figure slowly drew back her own covering, and Elira froze. "You," she breathed. The maid's eyes, sharp and dark, held hers. Her voice came low, hoarse with something that sounded too much like relief. "I heard the commotion. Then I saw you." A beat. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again. Not here. Not like this." Elira swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd still be in the kingdom." "Neither did I." Her mouth tightened. "But things haven't gone to plan." She cut off as another squad pounded past. Silence settled between them, taut and heavy. "You shouldn't be here," the maid said at last, voice raw. "They'll kill you." Something unspoken flickered in her eyes. Fear, not for herself, but for Elira. It stole the princess's breath for a moment. Then the maid sighed, glancing towards the shadows curling deeper behind her. "Come. You can't stay here. I know a place. Someone who will hide you. Provide a means for your safe return to the palace." Elira hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. And together, they vanished into the dark. The air in the room was thick with wood smoke and dread. Embers glowed in the hearth, painting restless shadows that leapt and twisted with every pass Jobel made before the fire. His muttering was a low, constant rhythm beneath the crackle of the fire, a litany of self-recrimination. "I never should have left her side." Not for a second. To separate, it was idiocy, a fatal error. He shot a glare toward Henrik, who sat motionless, his own anxiety a silent, heavy weight in the corner. "Why did I even listen to you?" The words erupted from him, sharp and frayed, finally breaking the unbearable quiet. Henrik opened his mouth, his expression pained, ready to defend the logic of their plan, but a new voice, sharp and clear as a shard of ice, sliced through the tension from the top of the wooden stairs. Because it was the smart thing to do. Amatonde. She descended, her movements as fluid and deliberate as a serpent uncoiling. Her features, sharp and severe in the flickering light, were as unreadable as polished obsidian. Her gaze swept over them, missing nothing. The frantic man, the watchful one, the atmosphere of despair. Before anyone could speak further, the door on the far side of the room swung inward. A man, broad and silent, entered, and behind him, stepping into the flickering light, was Elira. Time seemed to stutter and halt. Jobel's breath caught. For a heart-stopping second he was frozen, disbelief warring with a hope so violent it was painful. Then he moved. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into an embrace so fierce it seemed to defy the very possibility of separation. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob, a raw exhalation of relief that shook his entire frame. He buried his face in her hair, his arms locked around her. It was only as he began to pull back, his hands moving to cradle her face, to assure himself she was truly whole, that his gaze shifted over her shoulder, and locked onto the woman who had followed her in. The world tilted. Every instinct in his body, every fiber honed for her protection, screamed into a single, blinding point of recognition. That face, the maid from the coronation, the one who should be rotting in the deepest, darkest cell of the royal dungeon. His body reacted before his mind could. In a single fluid motion, he shoved Elira behind him, his own body becoming a shield. His dagger was in his hand, its blade catching the firelight as he leveled it at the woman, his expression a tempest of fury and confusion. "You," he snarled, the word a venomous promise. His eyes darted to Amatonde, then to Henrik, betrayal and rage warring within him. "What is this? What is she doing here?" A firm, gentle pressure on his arm. Elira stepped out from behind him, her touch pulling him back from the precipice of his fury. "Jobel!" Her voice was quiet, but it carried an undeniable weight of authority. She didn't look at the maid, her single eye holding his, steady and sure. "It's all right. She is the reason I am here. She is the reason I am alive right now." He searched her face, the storm in his eyes not yet calmed, the dagger still held ready. The contradiction was too immense, too violent to process. Assassin and savior could not be the same person. The escort gave a slight, respectful bow of his head toward Ama Tonde, utterly ignoring the standoff. He crossed to her, leaning close to murmur a few quiet words into her ear. Her eyes, fixed on the reunited pair, narrowed almost imperceptibly. A flicker of intense calculation passed through her eyes before it was smoothed away into a composed, inscrutable mask. She gave the man a single, graceful nod of understanding, and the man withdrew as silently as he had arrived and melted back out the door from which he'd come. Henrik let out a long, shaky breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "Amma." The single word was laden with warmth, a history of trust and familiarity. He stepped toward her, his voice lowering into a more intimate register. "We're going to need your help." Ama Tonde's smile was a small, fond thing, a glimpse of a different person beneath the polished exterior. "Of course, dear." Her gaze swept over the scene, Jobel's protective stance, Elira's calming hand. Finally, it settled on the maid's silent, watchful presence. The fondness in her expression didn't fade, but it gained a new, sharper edge. "Kaelin," Amma said, her voice softening further, yet laced with a subtle, chiding tone that spoke of familiarity. "It is a relief to see you well. But a walk in the village was a risk I would not have advised. The governor's eyes are everywhere." The maid, Kaelin, bowed her head in a gesture of deep respect mixed with apology. "Forgive me, Amma." The house felt stifling. "I only meant to take some air. When I saw the commotion at the market, then saw the princess—" Her eyes flickered toward Elira for a fraction of a second before returning to the floor. The situation demanded immediate action. But I was careful. I am certain no one who mattered saw me. Ama Tonde's lips curled into an unreadable smile. "I see. Well, I hope for all our sakes that your certainty is not misplaced." The words were softly spoken, but they hung in the air, a delicate warning wrapped in silk. Her demeanor then shifted seamlessly back to one of effortless hospitality. "Now," she announced, her voice warming as she included everyone in her gaze, "you must all be starving. Come upstairs. A hot meal will do more for your nerves than all the fretting in the world. We will eat, and—" She paused, her eyes settling on Henrik. "You will tell me everything." She started back up the stairs without waiting for a reply. Henrik followed without hesitation. After a moment's pause, Kaelin fell in behind him. Left in the dimness, Jobel finally lowered the dagger, though his body remained tense, a coiled spring. He looked from Elira to the retreating figures on the stairs, then back to her, his expression begging an explanation. Elira's fingers laced with his, a silent promise of that explanation to come. Together, they turned and followed the others up the stairs, leaving the shadowy worry of the room below. The simple wooden table was laden with simple, hearty food. The meal was eaten in a silence that was less comfortable and more cautiously observant. Ama Tonde had presided over the initial servings with a hostess's grace before excusing herself. "The rooms won't prepare themselves," she had said with a graceful wave of her hand. "Eat up. I'd be right back." Her absence left a void, quickly filled by a low, urgent tension. It was Henrik who broke it. He pushed his bowl aside, his voice low and earnest. "You can trust her," he began, his eyes moving from Elira to Jobel. "Amma, She's the only person who can get you back to the palace, safely." He explained then how their paths had crossed 2 years ago. A noble's daughter had been caught in a dalliance with a common stable boy. The noble family wanted the boy and his entire family erased. Amatonde had secretly intervened, tried to help them escape to another kingdom. She needed forged transit papers and new identities for them. Henrik said, breaking a piece of bread but not eating it. She needed to move them through our border checkpoint that was notoriously tight. That was how we met. I provided her the former. She handled the latter. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. She didn't do it for coin. She does it for them. And she's been doing it for long, helping those crushed under the boot of the elites find a way out, find a life somewhere the elites' wrath can't reach. Across the table, the maid, Kaelin, nodded slowly in acknowledgement. It is true. Her voice was quiet but clear. She turned her gaze to Elira. After you set me free, it was to Amma I came. She is the one who brought me to Darai. A memory, sharp and cold, flashed in Kaelin's eyes. The jolt of a horse beneath her, the suffocating confinement of the hood, the looming shadows of the checkpoint guards. The soldiers barked order, "State your business!" And then Amatonde's voice, cold and lethal as a drawn blade, silencing all opposition with a few chosen words. The barricade groaning open, the night swallowing them whole. She hid me. Kaelin continued, pulling herself back to the present. Fed me. Has been making the preparations to sneak me out of the kingdom. But then, with the current state of the kingdom, she needs to be extremely careful. The governor's eyes are everywhere. The roads are watched. All through this, Jobal's eyes were fixed on Elira, his food forgotten. His expression was a storm of confusion and hurt. She set her free. The assassin, Kaelin, the woman who drove a blade toward Elira's heart. Elira had not only spared her, but had orchestrated her freedom, and she had never told him. It felt like a breach of trust, a secret kept that should have been shared. Elira felt the weight of his gaze. She turned from Kaelin's story and met his eyes, and for a long moment, the room, Henrik, Kaelin, all of it fell away. She saw the questions, the fear that she was keeping secrets from him in a game where secrets could get them killed. Slowly she reached her free hand across the table and placed it over his where it rested, clenched beside his bowl. She didn't speak. She just squeezed, her touch firm and sure. The gesture was simple, but it was theirs, a silent language between them that promised, "I will explain. Trust me." The gesture didn't erase the questions, but it banked the fire in his eyes. The tight line of his jaw softened a fraction, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, turning his hand over to intertwine his fingers with hers. At that precise moment, the door opened, and Amatonde glided back in, her presence immediately reclaiming the room's atmosphere. "Your rooms are ready," she announced, her sharp eyes missing nothing, perhaps not even the clasped hands on her table. She offered a smile that was both gracious and final. "Though I had wished to hear your tale over the meal, I find the hour has grown too late for such weighty discussions. It will keep for the morning. Rest now. You are safe here." The statement was delivered with such absolute authority that it brooked no argument. The audience was over. The mysteries, the explanations, the dangerous journey ahead, all of it was temporarily suspended by the simple, undeniable command to rest. The servant led Senavi through the silent, book-lined corridors of High Minister Ijara's home. The air smelled of old parchment, polished wood, and a profound, unsettling quiet. A summons to his private residence was unusual. The man was a fortress of judicial propriety, and all his business was conducted within the stone walls of the court or his office, never his home. She had spent the ride over running through possibilities, each more dire than the last. When the servant opened the door to a private chamber, warmed by a low fire, the sight within made her pause only for a heartbeat. Lady Tavora was already there, seated in a high-backed chair, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The presence of the Keeper of Records clarified everything. This was not a summon to answer questions. It was a council of war. The third pillar of the old king's court, the one who had remained an enigma, was finally making his stand. Ijara did not rise. He merely gestured to the vacant chair beside Tavora. A servant offered wine, which Senavi politely refused with a slight shake of her head. Ijara waited until the door clicked shut, leaving the three of them in the hushed room. Not bothering with pleasantries, he cut to the chase. The missive you provided the court was a strategically sound move. He began, his voice a low, resonant rumble. He took a slow sip from his own goblet, his eyes never leaving hers. It bought what we most needed, time. But do not mistake tactical success for strategic victory. I knew it was manipulated the moment I saw it. And if I knew, you can be certain Makore knows. Senavi's eyes flicked to Tavora, who gave a minute, almost imperceptible shake of her head. I said nothing. You needn't look to her for a confession. Ijara continued, a trace of dry amusement in his tone. Lady Tavora is the master scribe of this generation. Her hand is in every decree, every precedent, quite unmistakable to those who know what to look for. And you two are the only ones with the skill, the access, and the motive to execute such a gambit. Makore does not need proof. He only needs to add 2 and 2. He set his goblet down with a soft, definitive click. We cannot sit and wait for them to assemble the evidence to publicly dismantle your forgery in court. That is a battle we will lose. It is time we stopped reacting and started acting. It is time we took the fight to them. Senavi and Tavora exchanged a look of hardened understanding. This was the alignment they had needed. All eyes are on you, Commander. Ijara continued. Every move you make, every soldier you dispatch, is noted. So, let me take the attention off of you. He leaned forward, the firelight carving deep lines into his stern face. Let me give them something else to worry about, while you do what you do best. Find the evidence. The real, undeniable evidence we need to bury everyone involved in what happened to the Crown Princess. And how will you achieve this distraction? Senavi asked, her voice low. He rose to his full height, an imposing figure of judicial authority. I am initiating an independent judicial inquiry into the tragic events surrounding the Crown Princess's journey to Darai and her subsequent disappearance. A fresh electric silence filled the room. Tavora's spine straightened. Senavi felt a fierce, sharp smile touch her lips. They both understood the power he had just unleashed. An inquiry. It was the one tool in the kingdom's legal arsenal that even a king could not easily stop. It granted Ijara, as High Minister, the supreme authority to subpoena any document and summon any person from any corner of the kingdom, from the lowest guard to the highest lord, to testify under oath before a closed judicial panel. Let me tie up Makore's key allies in endless, solemn testimony, Ijara said, a ruthless glint in his eyes. Let me demand the garrison's patrol logs from Darai, the tax collector's reports, the governor's personal correspondence. Let Makore waste his energy obstructing me, trying to bury every truth I unearth. It will create the chaos you need to operate. He took another sip of his wine. While they are looking at me, you, Commander, will be finding the knife we will use to cut their throats. The rest of the night was spent in a relentless, hushed strategy session. Maps were produced, names were written and connected with lines of ink. Theories were tested and discarded. Senavi, seeing the full commitment of her allies, laid her largest card on the table. The ambush wasn't just assassins, she said, her voice low. It was a military operation. Makore has a private army, a militia trained and funded with gold stolen from the royal mines. Their camp is hidden in the northern valleys. She revealed the militia's purpose, attributing the intelligence to a shadowy, unnamed source within the capital's underbelly, protecting Dine's identity completely. The revelation shifted the very foundation of the room. This was no longer mere political treason. It was sedition on the scale of open rebellion. Tavora's face grew grimmer as she spoke of financial irregularities and coerced decrees. Ijara listened, his mind already weaving their truths into legal frameworks, constructing subpoenas like traps. By the time the first grey light of dawn touched the windows, they had a plan, their strategies shifting from mere political countermeasures to the logistics of confronting a private army. Their plan was dangerous, it was audacious, and it was their only hope. The first thing he was aware of was the rough grain of wood against his cheek. The second was the dull, throbbing ache in his skull. The third was the panic. Jobal's eyes flew open, then squeezed shut against the sting of dusty air. He tried to swallow, but a dry, coarse cloth was pulled tight between his teeth, gagging him. He tried to move his hands to tear it away, and that's when the true, cold horror seized him. His wrists were bound behind his back, the rope biting so deeply into his flesh that his fingers were numb and cold. His ankles were lashed together just as cruelly. He was trussed like a game animal ready for the spit. He fought against the bonds for a frantic moment, a silent, screaming struggle that only resulted in fresh pain and the taste of his own fear. Forcing himself to stillness, he took in his surroundings. This was not the small, clean room Amatonde had shown them 2 hours ago. This was a cellar, a storage room of some kind, lined with empty barrels and sacks of grain, smelling of damp earth and neglect. With a grunt of effort, he managed to roll his body around, the movement sending another jolt of pain through his bound limbs. And then his blood ran cold. Elira. She lay on her side, her own mouth gagged, her eyes still closed in unconsciousness. Beyond her, Henrik and Kylan were in the same state. All of them were bound, all of them were prisoners. A cold, sickening dread washed over him. His mind raced, scrambling for a missed clue. The meal, the wine. It had to have been drugged. Ama's gracious hospitality had been a lie, a beautifully laid trap to lull them into a deep, helpless sleep so they could be easily packaged for slaughter. He had felt safe. He had let his guard down. The shame he felt in that moment was as acute as his fear. He had failed. Again. A low moan came from Elira as she began to stir, her single eye fluttering open. Confusion turned to wide-eyed alarm as she took in her bonds, the room, Jobal's terrified gaze. She struggled against her bindings, the ropes digging cruelly into her wrists. Her movements woke Henrik, who jerked awake with a start, his own muffled cries of disbelief joining hers. Finally, Kaylin's eyes snapped open, her expression mirroring Henrik's. The cellar door creaked open. They froze, every muscle tensing. They watched, heart hammering against their ribs, as Amatonde entered. Her expression was not the fond, gracious hostess's from the night before. It was a mask of cool, detached calculation. She looked over the scene of her captured guests as one might look over a well-stocked pantry. And she was not alone. 5 men filed in behind her. They moved with a predator's silence, their black cloaks seeming to drink the weak morning light filtering through a high, grimy window. Their faces were hard, impassive, and their eyes held the flat, professional emptiness of those for whom killing was a trade. They fanned out, surrounding them. Amatonde's sharp gaze swept over her captured guests, and her lips curved into a smile that never touched her cold eyes. "Good," she said, her voice a soft, chilling contrast to the violence of their situation. "You're all awake. It saves me the trouble of having to wake you." She took another step, her fine shoes silent on the floor. She looked directly at Elira. "Lord Makore sends his regards," she said. The terror of the moment solidified around them, a suffocating ice. One of the assassins stepped forward, a long, cruel knife appearing in his hand as if by magic. He didn't look at Amma for instruction. He already had his orders. Amma's smile widened, a final, terrifying flourish. He said, "To make sure you understand that this time there will be no river to save you."